Hello, everyone, and welcome to our How to Be an Activist training. We are going to allow a few minutes for late arrivals, so hang tight and we will get started in a couple of minutes. I also want to announce that if you need ASL interpretation, our wonderful interpreter, Michael, is here to provide that for you. His video should be pinned and visible for you. But if you have issues accessing the interpretation, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to let us know. All right, everyone. We are just past 12 o'clock now, and we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Welcome to the How to Be an Activist webinar. I'm Megan Abell, Director of Advocacy with Tech Equity Collaborative. I'm excited to be here today and to dig into how you can get active and engaged in your community and on the issues that you care about most. A little bit about me and my background. I am in charge here at Tech Equity of our campaigns and our advocacy work. And prior to coming to Tech Equity, I have a long history of doing activism and working on campaigns. I worked on the Obama campaign in Colorado in 2012 as a field organizer. I've been a union organizer for healthcare workers and have worked on just about every type of issue and advocacy campaign that you can think of. So I'm excited to share a bit more about what activism can look like at Tech Equity and within your community today. I'm also excited to introduce my colleagues, Navi Dhaliwal and Matt Brooks. I'll kick it over to Navi to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Navi Dhaliwal. Pronouns are she, her, and I am Tech Equity's Organizing Manager. I have the pleasure to work with our community to connect them to engagement opportunities through our legislative or electoral work, many of which you'll be hearing about today and throughout this training. My experience in advocacy is similar to my colleagues. I walked into Senator Mike McGuire's Senate campaign back when he ran in 2014, door knocking and phone banking for him, and have been doing volunteer ops since. I also have experience working as a Senate fellow, so familiar with the landscape and what advocacy efforts look like on the other side. Really excited to dive into that, but for now, I'll pass it on to my colleague Matt for his introduction.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Brooks. I use he, him pronouns, and I run the Civic Tech program here at Tech Equity. And similar to my colleagues, I also got started in activism just by showing up. I remember walking into a No on Prop 8 office back in 2008 and just making calls. And since then, I've volunteered and worked on political campaigns, registering and turning out young voters. And then now here at Tech Equity, I manage our technical volunteers to build projects that support our organizing and advocacy work.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the introductions, and we're going to hear more from Navi and Matt later in the conversation about all the amazing work that they're doing here at Tech Equity. So I want to dive in now to talk a little bit about Tech Equity and how we work as an organization. I'm sure many of you that are joining the conversation today are familiar with our work and are joining this particular event to learn about how you can get more deeply engaged with our organization. But if this is your first event with Tech Equity, I want to provide some background so that you can be familiar with our organization. Our goal is to mobilize tech workers in the fight for economic justice. We think that by changing the conditions in which the tech sector is growing, we can ensure that our industry creates broad-based prosperity and opportunity rather than entrenching inequities. And we think that effective structural change will eliminate policies that institutionalize inequity. And that's a key part of ensuring that the tech economy can benefit everyone. We help tech workers to approach these big problems and to engage in system change in three major ways. We help to educate you about the most critical civic issues where you live through events like this one, panel discussions, webinars, and all kinds of educational materials like our blog and our voter guides that we produce during election season. We also activate you on a policy agenda that results in a more inclusive economy and helps you to get engaged around these big issues. We engage in things like voter turnout, signature gathering, and lobbying on policies that will really shift the dynamics in our communities. And we also have a corporate practice program where we work directly with companies who want to change their internal policies within the tech sector, because we know that this can unlock opportunity and can also change conditions for the better for employees of these companies overnight. So for companies that are willing to be good actors in this space, we want to work with them to do the best. And the great news is that tech workers over the last couple of years that our organization has been in existence have been really excited to show up at the table. And we think that tech workers should be working together both within the tech community and in other non-tech settings in order to shift these issues and to advocate for solutions to our most pressing problems. So you might be asking, what are these pressing problems that are affecting our communities deeply and preventing access to opportunity? We really focus on housing and workforce and labor issues. We believe that they can make the biggest impact on creating opportunity and making it available by focusing on where people live and making sure that that's affordable. And also that they have a living wage to pay those rents, right? Where you're able to afford to live very much affects your access to economic opportunity, and what kind of job you have and what wages that job pays affect whether you're able to afford to live in these high opportunity areas. So our goal is bold and comprehensive change by companies and by government, led by the tech workforce, in order to ensure opportunity for everyone. It's crucial that tech workers show up, leverage their skills and resources, and add capacity to these existing struggles for housing justice and labor justice. And we want to encourage you to join in this work, and showing up today is an awesome first step. So if you're new to Tech Equity, and this is your first time coming to an event, thank you so much for being here today. I also want to give a couple of housekeeping announcements before we dive into the rest of our content. It's worth mentioning that we have a code of conduct for our events that we will enforce in the chat. So the chat is a place for you to talk to other participants and to share knowledge and ask questions of one another. But we want to make sure that this is a respectful place for learning and that everyone feels safe engaging in the event today. So Herman will be putting the code of conduct in full in the chat, a link there. So if you want to check that out in more detail, you're welcome to. The gist is just be respectful of one another as we're discussing in the chat. We also will have time at the end of the event for you to ask questions of myself and our other panelists, Navi and Matt. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of panelists. We'll be looking there during the Q&A function. We're not going to be looking in the chat. So if you put your question in the chat, it might get lost. Make sure you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We also will be recording this event, and we'll share a recording out to participants today via email after the event. So if you want to share the recording with friends who weren't able to make it, you're more than welcome to do so. And I already announced at the beginning, but I want to announce once again for any late arrivals that we do have an ASL interpreter with us today, Michael, for access needs. So his video is pinned on your screen and you should be able to see that. If you have any issues accessing interpretation today, please let us know in the chat and we'll try to assist you. So that wraps up our housekeeping, and we can kick right off with what is activism and who can be an activist and what does it look like. I think it's important for us to get a definition of what activism is. Activism is really about harnessing your power and engaging in activities that help to assert your power. When your activism is effective, you have the ability to influence, direct, or determine the actions of others. Most commonly, we're talking about elected officials and decision makers, but really activism can be applied to anyone who has the power to decide and you want to influence that decision. It's important to remember that if you aren't taking action to influence or determine these decisions, you're being acted upon. Someone else is making decisions about your life and your community without your influence. And possibly worse, others with interests opposite than your own are asserting their influence to ensure that decisions are made in their favor. Anyone can be an activist, and everyone should be an activist in some form. In fact, you probably already are an activist in some small way. Have you ever tweeted about an issue that you care about, like reposting an article about something? That's activism. Have you ever spoken to your kid's teacher or school administration to give feedback about a policy or an instruction practice? That's activism. Activism can be big and small. It can be personal with only impact to your close circle, or it can be on a global scale, and it's all needed. Showing up, being present, and opening yourself up to learning and trying something out is the first and most important step. So thanks for being here and taking that first step today. So what should you do in order to begin this journey in becoming an activist? Well, the quick answer is you should do something and you should do anything. Action is, of course, better than inaction, and many would-be activists are concerned about being good at it, picking the right project or campaign, making sure they can commit and do it well. And it's admirable, wow, that volunteers want to be thoughtful and committed to the practice of activism, but it does take practice. People aren't good at something the first time they try it. So it's important to just try and learn. Just like any other job or activity that you engage in, it takes some time and exploration in order to find the right fit and in order to find your political home. Most campaigns, issues, and activism opportunities will have three main ways for you to contribute. And this is true at Tech Equity as well. The first is to give your time. Sometimes just showing up and spending time on something is important. This can look like stuffing campaign mailers into envelopes or sitting in a hearing room wearing a Tech Equity t-shirt. The work may be unglamorous, but it needs to be done. Just the simple act of spending the time shows your investment, and that has an impact. In the instance of sitting in a hearing room for a few hours on a bill that you care about, it shows legislators that you, and hopefully many others like you, cared enough to spend a few hours of your time to voice your support at a hearing. The next is through your talent. Your skills are valuable on a campaign, whatever they are. Maybe you've got the gift of gab and you're great at talking on the phone with voters, testifying at a hearing, or speaking at a rally. Maybe you're super organized and you can help to prep packets of materials for other volunteers to help the campaign scale up or help manage the logistics of a campaign event. Maybe you're very analytical, so you can help to evaluate campaign metrics in order to maximize performance. Maybe you're a great manager, so you can help to coach other volunteers or bring out the best in them to help the volunteer team run at peak performance. Maybe you're not sure how your skills can match up with campaign needs, and that's where organizers come in. Tech Equity has 2 organizers on staff to help match you with campaign activities that are well suited for you and to help make sure that you have the tools and the resources necessary to do that campaign work and feel comfortable doing it. The final way to contribute is through money. If life gets busy and volunteering seems out of reach, you don't have the time to contribute, money is another great way to contribute that gives organizations like ours the resources necessary to do this work. If you're unable to show up and volunteer, the financial contribution that you give ensures that we can hire someone in to help cover that work, that we can spend money to communicate out to voters who need to hear about an issue. So money is always a valuable resource on campaigns and always welcome, even if you can't volunteer. So now that you know the 3 key ways to engage, what are the main types of campaigns that you could work on? At Tech Equity, we focus on structural and systemic change that can make a lasting impact at scale. And that's why we focus on changing laws that shape the conditions in which the tech sector and our broader economy grows. We affect public policy through our legislative policy campaigns and through direct democracy voting. So Navi has been running some exciting volunteer efforts in the legislature this year, so I'll turn it over to her to share more about those campaigns.
Thank you, Megan. So our legislative advocacy work connects our community to the legislative cycle as it relates to their passion for change. Many of us remember learning about the legislative process back in high school, where you can vaguely sing along to Schoolhouse Rock's "I'm Just a Bill" song, but it's been a while. So I'm going to take a moment and just go through the process and highlight some relevant advocacy moves that can happen. The legislative process and how a bill travels through the cycle is really driven by the support it receives from constituents like yourself. One thing that can occur even before what's on the slide is an idea. An idea or an issue can be brought forth by a member of the community or through an organization like Tech Equity Collaborative. This year, we took an initiative from our 2021 Contract Worker Disparity Project that helped shed light on disparities that exist on the contract workforce and worked alongside legislators and community leaders to craft a bill that would advocate for pay equity. Eventually, this led the bill to being introduced on the Senate floor as Senate Bill SB 1162, the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act. Once the bill is introduced, it travels through committee. All bills are assigned to policy committees according to their subject area. So for example, SB 1162 deals with the workforce and pay, so it was heard in the Senate Committee on Labor, Public Employment, and Retirement. Committee is one of our biggest opportunities to advocate for legislation. This is where we'll ask our community members to voice their support or even opposition of a bill. If a bill passes through its assigned committees, it will be read in the OG House of Origin. So for example, back in the Senate by the author, then discussed by the members, and then voted upon. If it passes, the bill makes its way to the other house and repeats the process. Once both houses approve a bill, it goes to the governor, where they can do 3 different actions: sign the bill into law, allow it to become law without their signature, or even veto the bill. And then most bills go into effect on the first day of January of the new year. So I know that was a lot, and now I get to talk a little bit more about how you can get involved in the legislative process. I touched upon the opportunities during the leg cycle, but let's chat about this a little bit more. Whether it's voicing your support through a committee, calling a lawmaker's office to urge them to take a position, or providing a statement during a lobby visit with our staff and a lawmaker, we've got the tools, the message trainings, and the guides to ensure you can advocate for issues that matter to you. Calling into committees illustrates the community support around the issue and takes about 10 to 15 minutes of your day. It's a great way to get involved in a time crunch. When you have a little bit more time, providing testimony, as many of our members do during a lobby visit, or meeting with a lawmaker, provides perspective and creates a tangible connection to the bill. Nothing, and I want to emphasize this, nothing means more to a lawmaker than hearing from their constituents. It makes sense, right? Because they advocate for you and your community. Having your presence via phone or through video is the key to pass legislation. And it can be hard to measure impact, but we've got a handle of what that looks like. Getting your bill talked about in the office of a lawmaker is important for a bill to successfully pass. With hundreds of bills passing through the legislature each session, it's easy for many bills to not be on a key member's radar. Getting folks to call into a bill is vital because it will bring the issue to the forefront. Oftentimes, lawmakers don't have the time to sift through bills, so they can rely on their staff to help pull key bills. And the staff members are often those individuals intercepting phone calls that come in through constituents. We believe that roughly 15 to 20 calls is a threshold that can get a bill assigned to a staffer, and they can help bring that bill the visibility it deserves to the lawmaker and often take a position on the bill. Putting your bill on the radar is the name of the game, and it's what we strive to do here. That being said, I wanted to take a moment to chat about some of the bills we've advocated for in the past. SB 331, the Silence No More Act, now allows employees to speak out with the fear of retaliation. This bill was a part of our 2021 priority legislation, and we worked closely with the authors, Senator Levia and Ifeoma Azoma, a former Pinterest tech employee who experienced discrimination in the workplace. No longer were workplace harassment victims who accepted a severance package or reached a settlement agreement required to stay silent, as the company that enabled their abuse swept what happened under the rug. Instead, they can hold their abusers accountable in every way possible, including financially, in the court of public opinion, and in the court of law. We had members of the community join us with lobbying meetings and calling into committees to voice their support on this bill. And the bill successfully passed and was enacted into law this year in January. Another bill that we worked on is the issue around tenant protections. So most residential tenancies in California are now covered by some form of rent and eviction control. The Tenant Protection Act of 2019 extended a rent cap and eviction controls to anywhere in the state where rent control didn't already exist. We even worked with our partners to help launch a tool for renters to learn about their rights. Our Civic Tech Manager, Matt's going to chat about that a little bit more, but it's groundbreaking law that has supported hundreds of renters across the state of California. And we really couldn't be successful without the support of our community and many of you on the phone today. So that brings me to what we're doing this year. SB 1162, the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act. Contract workers often perform many of the same job functions as their directly employed peers, but get paid less. The Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act ensures that workers are compensated fairly and that lawmakers have the access to the same information on the contract workers. Contract workers, as many of you might know, you might have a contract worker as a colleague, you might be a contract worker, have done it in the past. It's a necessary component of how we conduct business today. And that's why you can voice your support for 1162 next Tuesday at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Another bill that we sponsored this year is AB 2469, Statewide Rental Registry. A statewide rental registry will focus on the scale and severity of the rental housing crisis. This bill will help cities pinpoint where housing needs are most acute, allowing local governments, affordable housing developers, and market rate developers to identify areas for equitable development. A rental registry is the common sense first step to democratize data that the state desperately needs by developing a statewide online portal. We'll continue to keep you updated on opportunities to engage with this bill, but are excited to have you, again, if you can join the Senate Judiciary Committee for SB 1162, we'll be so stoked, so excited to have you all there. That is it for our legislative advocacy, at least for this presentation. I hope to see a few of you next Tuesday during committee. I will continue to say that, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Megan to chat a little bit more about our electoral advocacy work.
Thanks, Navi. And I believe that Herman will be dropping some links in the chat for you to sign up for these volunteer opportunities as we mention them. If you don't get a chance to click the link in the chat, we will also include these in the follow-up email for you as well. And even better than registering yourself would be to forward that follow-up email to a couple of friends so that we can get as much support as possible on board for the committee hearing on Tuesday and for all of the other volunteer opportunities that we're going to mention today. So we talked a lot about how structural change is really important to ensuring that the tech sector can create opportunity and prosperity that's accessible to everyone. We know that this isn't going to happen on its own. We have to create structural change. Legislation is one of the ways for us to do that, as Navi just covered. But another great way for us to do this is through electoral advocacy. Voting is one of the easiest and most direct ways to make an impact on these issues, and moving voters to the polls on these issues only multiplies your impact. So being an informed voter yourself is of course important, but we also do a lot of work in order to ensure that we can educate as many voters as possible and turn them out to the polls on the issues that will impact our communities most. Empowering tech workers with the information that you need to make a decision at the ballot is a really core part of our electoral program. And that's the reason why we produce a voter guide every single election season that allows you to cast your ballot with confidence. So in just a couple of short weeks here, we are going to be releasing our 2022 primary voter guide, where we will share information about the ballot measures and the candidates that will impact the future of our state. But you can go even further in your activism beyond just voting yourself, and reach out to new and unlikely voters to ensure that they are engaged and educated on these issues. And also make sure that we turn out people that are aligned with us to the polls. A lot of people forget about the primary election because there's so much focus on the general election in November. So ensuring that we're spreading the word that an important election is coming up really soon in June, and that people are equipped to cast their ballots with confidence is going to be really key over the next couple of weeks as we head into summer. And there's a ton of advocacy opportunities available around the election season. For example, last year in the 2020 November election, Tech Equity volunteers worked alongside a broad coalition of advocacy organizations To qualify Prop 15, a corporate property tax reform that would have poured billions into our public services for things like affordable housing development. Tech equity volunteers hit the streets and gathered hundreds and hundreds of signatures. You can see on the left here, our amazing volunteer Emery, who works at Airbnb, got out on the streets to gather signatures for Prop 15 to ensure that corporate landowners are taxed fairly and we can contribute those tax dollars to important public services that our communities desperately need. We also have hosted dozens of house parties over the last several years to help spark a discussion amongst your friends so that we can act together on the ballot and on these issues. We'll be offering house parties again in person, COVID permitting, or digitally on Zoom this November election to engage around the 2022 ballot. This has been really popular over the course of the last several years for our organization, where we can discuss what's on the ballot together, and Tech Equity helps to facilitate that discussion with your friends so that everyone feels prepared to head into the voting booth. We also have focused a lot on voter education and voter turnout. In the last election season in 2020, Tech Equity volunteers called nearly 4,000 voters to persuade them to vote for Prop 15 and to turn them out to the polls. We hosted phone banks every single week through the summer and into the fall to turn voters out and ensure that they voted yes on Prop 15. And right now we are closely monitoring the measures that are circulating for signature to qualify for this November's ballot, and we'll likely launch a new voter contact initiative this summer to talk to voters about these key issues that will be on the November ballot. So if you're not yet subscribed to our newsletter or a part of our Slack community, make sure you keep an eye on that email newsletter in your inbox, or that you join the Slack community to get updates as things progress and we launch these new volunteer opportunities headed into the fall. So it's important to note that your impact in getting involved in electoral politics is huge. You can help to mobilize people to vote that will help to shape our community for the better. In the instance of Prop 15, which I've been discussing, this measure would have raised billions of dollars for local services that are sorely needed in our communities. And that measure unfortunately fell short by just 4% of the voting public. So we were really close to victory on that measure, and just getting a few more folks engaged as volunteers to educate a few more voters is really the impact that's necessary to move these issues forward. We're committed to providing you and your network the right tools and resources to vote and to volunteer on electoral issues so that you can become a more active participant in your community. So if you're excited about the upcoming election and you want to get involved, I would highly recommend that you set a meeting with someone from our organizing team, either Navi or Herman, and they can talk to you more about these upcoming opportunities and how you can get more deeply engaged. As I mentioned, organizers are an amazing resource to help to match you with the activities that are going to be the best fit for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Herman or Navi on our team. Aside from general political engagement around the legislature and electoral issues, we also want to make sure that you can use your skill set in a way that feels impactful and meaningful. And we have a special program just for you, engineers, UI, UX designers, data analysts, any of you technical tech workers out here to use your skills in a way that's going to be impactful for advocacy and for our projects. So I'll hand it over to Matt, our Civic Tech Manager, to talk more about this program.
Great, thanks, Megan. Yeah, so as Megan mentioned, another way you can get involved is to join our volunteer Civic Tech team and contribute to technical projects that support all that organizing and advocacy and electoral work. So what is the Civic Tech team? We're a group of volunteer engineers, UX designers, researchers, data practitioners It's a technical team, but you don't have to be a coder, and really any skills you bring to the table, we can usually plug in somewhere on our projects. We build applications, tools, visualizations that support the work that ours and other value-aligned organizations are doing. And I really try to think of our work as advancing along two fronts. So one is on policy outcomes, and the other one is on policy implementation. So for example, we might work on a visualization that helps educate and build support for better laws being passed, or we might work on an app that helps people connect people to the services that they're entitled to under those new laws. So just thinking of that in terms of advancing on both of those fronts. And a few background things about kind of the ethos of the Civic Tech team. We're open source, so every piece of code we write is public and open. We're also not solutionists, so we really can't code our way out of political problems, but what we can do is support the great work being done by both our and other organizations to solve those problems. And then finally, just being collaborative. We're here to learn from each other. The volunteer team is meant to be fun. I learn from our volunteers all the time. We're trying to find projects that are interesting and fun to work on. Okay, so with that background out of the way, I wanted to talk about, just give you an idea of some of the projects that we're working on right now that we currently have in development. So the first one I'll mention is tenant protections, and my colleagues have referenced this earlier in the presentation, but this is a website where we help renters figure out if they qualify for state or local rent control or rent stabilization, and the max amount that their rent can be raised. So that's kind of a policy implementation type of application there. We're also working on a legislation tracker. This is an open source package of tools to scrape and compile and track key information about the thousands of bills that are making their way through the California legislature at any given time. So those are a couple of projects we're working on. We're also working on a couple of visualizations, mapping visualizations on a couple of fronts. Again, my colleagues also referred to the Schools and Communities First, Prop 15 from the other year. We're working on a visualization around Prop 13, the original property tax bill that created that inequity. We're mapping the parcel level commercial property taxes and just showing some of those issues. And then also the housing shortage, building a map visualization looking at the relationship between job growth and housing construction in California. I would say on these projects, the strongest need right now is probably for front-end developers, but we can always plug in varying skill sets into these projects. So if you're a designer, a researcher, a data person, or you have a completely different skill set and you want to contribute and you want to get involved, look out for the sign up link coming towards the end of the presentation to meet with me and get integrated into one of these projects. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the impact that some of these projects can have. So let's start with the tenant protection site. So just for some background on that, California has about 40 million people, and just under half of those are renters, about 45%. The Tenant Protections Act of 2019 extended rent cap protection to an estimated additional 8 million people, and that's on top of people that were already covered under the municipalities in California that have local rent control. Our version 1 of the site looks at that statewide cap, and we're building the site out to a full experience that really tracks both local and statewide laws and helps renters sort that out. And the potential audience for that is literally in the millions. So many people in California are renting and are, potentially subject to illegal rent raises by their landlords. The site that we have in the current site is already being used by our partners over at ACE, the Alliance for Californians for Community Empowerment, every day. So the potential audience and impact for this really is enormous. Secondly, I want to talk about Prop 13, which has been referenced a few times already. The ballot measure back from 2020, Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. estimated to restore approximately $12 billion per year. And that would have gone to local schools, local communities, really evening the playing field in terms of commercial property taxes and taking that money and pumping it right back into the local communities. And it only failed by 4%. So, building compelling visualizations, public education tools that really bring some of these issues home for folks, and any voters we can sway on that really has the potential to leverage a massive impact for the state the next time around. So again, if you want to contribute your talent to any of these projects, look out towards the end of the presentation for that link to get connected.
Thanks so much, Matt. The Civic Tech projects are so useful for our advocacy, and I'm really excited to see what Matt and the rest of the Civic Tech volunteers cook up in the future. So let's pivot now to talk about what you can do today, next week, right after this call. So as we discussed, there's 3 main ways for you to contribute to our campaigns, through your time, through your skills, or through giving your money. So on the time front, we talked about how there's a judiciary hearing for SB 1162 next week. You can dial into the committee hearing on Tuesday to state your support for the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act. This is a great way for you to ensure that the tech community shows up for closing the pay gap. So if you want to attend the hearing, you can register at the link in the chat or in the link that will be in the follow-up email. You can also use your skills to support our campaigns. And you can schedule a conversation with one of our organizers to find projects that match your skills. A 30-minute conversation can be scheduled through the link in the chat or in the follow-up email. And this will help to just dive into what your skill set is, how that matches up with current campaign needs, and also help to just establish a relationship with our organizing team so that they can reach out to you when new opportunities come up that might be a good fit. And you can, of course, give your money by supporting our work financially. You can join us as a member, and the financial contribution that you give ensures that we have the resources to launch bigger campaigns with bolder goals. You can give money monthly or annually through the link in the chat and in the follow-up email. We suggest that folks give at least $10 a month or $100 a year to support our work. But of course, we welcome you to contribute at any level that works for you and your budget. So those are the 3 main ways that you can get involved today coming out of this conversation. As Navi said, we hope to see some of you at the SB 1162 hearing, and we hope to have conversations with many of you in the coming weeks to get to know you better and to match you with volunteer opportunities that will work well for you. So thanks everyone for diving in today. And now I'd love to turn it over for audience Q&A. So what do we have going on in the Q&A box?
Yeah, we have quite a few questions. It is live in the Q&A box today. Our first question is there any action presented today that we can't do if we're not a registered voter or unable to register?
Oh, this is a good question. You can engage in all kinds of advocacy work if you're not a citizen, not a registered voter, unable to register. And in fact, because you're not able to cast your ballot yourself, I think it's even more important that you get engaged in advocacy work. Even if you're not a registered voter, you can call other registered voters to ask them to vote in the way that you think is just and right. You can engage with elected officials and show up at committee hearings. So there's no laws or rules on the books that prevent you from doing this advocacy work if you're not a registered voter. The only thing that you can't do if you are not a voter is vote yourself. So everything else is open to you to engage with and to get involved with.
Great, thank you, Megan. This question is for Matt. To volunteer for Civic Tech, is there a certain amount of hours that I need to dedicate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Civic Tech team is very flexible and we will really work around your schedule. So if you're interested in volunteering, the first step is to sign up on that link. And what will happen is I'll reach out to you and we'll set up a one-on-one and chat, and we'll just fit, volunteers. You all have really busy lives and a lot going on. And so I work with folks individually to just determine what are you comfortable contributing? How do you want to plug in? How much time do you want to dedicate? It's really, really flexible. There's no minimum and there's no maximum.
Great, thank you, Matt. Our next question is, are we looking to offer any additional resources on how to be an activist? I can take that one. So we'll always have opportunities to engage in our campaigns. And like I mentioned during the legislative advocacy portion of our presentation, we'll always provide templates, a number of resources, message training, guides on how to really be your best activist, be comfortable providing testimony or making a call. Hopefully in the future, we might do like a blog or something, but we'll continue to keep you all posted. The best way to find resources on how to become an activist is signing up and subscribing to our newsletter to stay as up to date with the work that we're doing. But that's the best way, really. And just, keep your ear to the ground. And I will say this, like I promised to say it again earlier, we have SB 1162 hearing. We would love for you to join in and provide a support for our bill.
Yeah, and just to add on to this and highlight Navi's great work, if you do register for that hearing on SB 1162, once you register, you'll get email instructions that walk you exactly through how to call into the committee, what to say when you've called in. So we try to make this really accessible and easy for you, but the first thing to do is just sign up, as Navi said.
Great. Another question that we got, Megan, this might be perfect for you to answer, is the comment initially started with, thank you so much for mentioning the harm of Prop 13 and what Prop 15 could have done to restore fairness and funding to underserved communities. Is there another measure coming in the future to address this? That is the question.
There's so much to consider in terms of running a measure to reform our property tax system again. And we are in an active conversation with a broad coalition of organizations to evaluate if the conditions will be right for us to do this again in a future electoral cycle. So I don't have a hard and fast answer about when we're running it again or if we're running it again, but just know that there's tons of experienced advocates who are coming together to evaluate that. And of course, as soon as we have an answer, we'll be the first to let you know. We remain committed to corporate property tax reform and want to see that come to fruition, especially because we were so close in the 2020 election. It would be a shame if we didn't try to get it again in the future. So yeah, keep a lookout on our newsletter and we'll let you know as soon as a decision has been come to. Tech Equity was just one organization amongst dozens and dozens involved in this fight. So it's not our decision alone, but we'll let you know.
Great. Our next question is, are bills typically initiated or written by Tech Equity, or do you pick up bills written by others that align? Megan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, the answer is both. So this year, we had 2 bills that we authored ourselves and that were our own concept. SB 1162 actually came out of research work that Tech Equity did called the Contract Worker Disparity Project, where we looked into the conditions around contract work within the tech sector. And this was through a large-scale survey that we conducted, as well as interviews with contract workers within the tech sector. And through this research, we identified a lot of the problems that exist with contract work, and also figured out some solutions that we could enact. And so we moved forward in trying to pass one of those solutions this year through SB 1162. So we partnered with several other organizations, including the California Employment Lawyers National Employment Law Project, and equal rights advocates, and the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, to come together and author legislation. So a big part of that was informed by Tech Equity's research, but also through our partnership with these other organizations to author SB 1162. In the case of the statewide rent registry bill, AB 2469, Tech Equity is the sole sponsor of that bill. So we worked to craft that legislation ourselves in partnership with Assemblymember Wick's office. So we do both. We author legislation ourselves, we author legislation in partnership with other organizations. And in some instances, other organizations have amazing ideas and we're not involved in the authorship of the bill, but we get involved to campaign in support of the bill. The way that we do this at Tech Equity is by sort of creating tiers for legislation. The first is our authored legislation like SB 1162 and AB 2469. The next tier is our priority legislation, and this is legislation that we didn't author or co-author, but we support, and we think it's a great concept. So we'll join a coalition to support that campaign. And then the final is our support legislation, where we'll register letters of support and chip in where we can. But there's just such a volume of bills, we can't get deeply involved in everything. So these are the ones where we want to make sure we do some sort of touch or some sort of advocacy work on it, but we're not as deeply as involved as our priority or our sponsors legislation.
Great, thank you, Megan. Another question that we received is if very similar bills are introduced in both the House and the Senate, how are they reconciled into one bill? And does that affect how to advocate for it?
Yeah, the answer to this one is kind of complicated. So sometimes a sort of dual track strategy is intentional. So the makeup of the Senate and the Assembly are, of course, different, and the political calculus within each of those houses is different. And so sometimes in order to increase the chances of victory, the same or almost the same policy will be simultaneously introduced to both houses. That way, if the bill, for example, dies in the Assembly, we can keep going in the Senate and hope that we can cross the finish line through that vehicle. So sometimes this is an intentional strategy where we know, one of them is not going to make it, but we're sort of doubling our chances. Sometimes it's happenstance where people are not coordinated and the same thing gets introduced and nobody planned on that. And in that case, it's very often that the bill authors, the assembly members or the senators will come to a compromise internally. Very often this ends up in combining the bills and then co-authoring each other's bills, right? So for example, if Assemblymember Bonta and Assemblymember Wicks had essentially the same bill, they would combine the bill and then co-author together. So Wicks and Bonta would both be authors on the bill. So those are the most common instances where we see that, but of course there's all kinds of outlier situations because the legislature is kind of complete chaos, if I'm being honest. It's organized chaos, but it's pretty chaotic.
A fun chaos, essentially. Thank you, Megan, for that answer. Another question that we have in the Q&A box is, do you have to be a tech worker in order to join in on the fun of all of our electoral legislative advocacy?
Do you want me to take that or you want to take that, Navi?
No, I can take that. While we work to empower tech workers, and most of our like messaging is around tech, we do welcome really anybody from the community to get involved. Like I had mentioned earlier, legislative advocacy is really important to push an envelope on the bill and get a bill on the radar for our legislature. So if you are passionate about a housing bill we're working on or pay transparency, please join us, join in to call in. We'd love to have you join the organization in that way and support that work. And that's the same for our electoral advocacy. There might be a ballot initiative or a measure that's very close or hits very close to home for you. And so you're welcome to join in on that as well. And then bring your friends. I feel like oftentimes I don't come from a tech background, but I have a lot of family members and friends that are tech workers who may have not found tech equity just yet. And so bring those folks along with you and show them how much of a fun time it is to get involved in advocacy work, because boy, is it just a blast. Another question that we actually did get is if we are an organization, I found this in the chat as well, if we're an organization with needs your group might be able to fill, what's the best way to approach Tech Equity Collaborative?
You can email me. It's megan@techequitycollaborative.org. Send me an email. We'll figure it out.
We'll go ahead and drop that in the chat as well. So folks have access to Megan, who really works and does fantastic work with our coalition partners every day. A few other questions in the Q&A box. How is Tech Equity practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization to reduce the chances of inadvertently perpetuating inequities in the process of trying to create it?
That one for me.
Yeah.
We really focus on partnership with people that are the closest to the problems. So we know that tech workers, generally are more privileged and are generally further away from these problem sets, or that they'll have a lessened impact, personal impact when these issues occur. That's not to say that tech workers are totally immune to the problems that exist in our communities, but we know that there are others that are much more deeply impacted. So, Matt mentioned that with tenantprotections.org, for example, we developed that site really because we heard from legal aid organizations and from tenant organizers that they were concerned that they would be overwhelmed with requests from tenants who are suffering, and that they didn't have the capacity to fulfill all of those requests for support as these new laws went into effect and people gained new rights. And so we worked in coalition with those legal aid organizations and with those tenant advocacy organizations to develop tenantprotections.org so that people could self-educate about the new laws and help to direct them to the right resources to lessen the burden on these legal aid and tenant groups. So that's a really great example of how a project that we've done really came out of a need and a request from those people and from those organizations that are most directly impacted. And Matt has done really great work to engage with those groups and to do, user testing directly with tenants who would be accessing the site to make sure it's serving their needs. With our political campaigns, we're also working in coalition with a broad set of organizations to ensure that we're taking into account impacts to communities that don't look like our own. We think it's important that tech workers come to the table and to add capacity to these existing struggles, but we really recognize that the struggle for worker justice and for housing justice long predate our organization or even the invention of the tech sector. So we want to make sure that we're acting in partnership with those that have been in this struggle for a lot longer than us.
Great. In addition to that, it was a follow-up question. Is Tech Equity trying to use an anti-racist lens in this work? And what I was going to say is checking out our legislative agenda for this year. One of our priority bills this year is SCA 2, which will repeal Article 34 of the California Constitution, that usually requires a vote from or a vote of approval from voters, from constituents in a city before building any low income or affordable housing units. One thing about this bill itself is that it's was made back in 1950, definitely had more of a segregated lens to the issue area and development of low income housing. And so we are right now putting our capacity and our campaigning capacity around advocating and supporting SCA 2, which will repeal that and allow for affordable housing units to be built by the city without that voter approval and eliminate that what is considered this racist policy that has existed for quite some time in the California Constitution. So that's a little bit of an example of some of the anti-racist lens that we take into our work. Megan, I didn't know if you wanted to follow up with that, but I think you did a great job in answering it earlier as well, but just in case.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to our website, I guess I can drop the link. We do have core values as an organization, and anti-racism is at the top of the list. You know, we want to acknowledge and account for the racism and bias that is within the system and is, you know, maintained through policy. So we want to ensure that we're looking critically and being explicit about our anti-racist values as we move through the work. So certainly something that we pay attention to as we approach this work and acknowledge as a part of the work.
Yeah. And that's it for our Q&A today.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock. So we know that you all probably have meetings to run off to, but I hope that you open the follow-up email that will come from this conversation, and we'll have links to register for all of the different advocacy opportunities that are coming up before us. If none of the advocacy opportunities that are coming up appeal to you, that's okay. Take a moment to meet with one of our organizers. A link to talk to an organizer will also be in the follow-up email, and we'll find an advocacy opportunity that does fit you. So please reach out and register for something coming out of this conversation and commit to take action. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great Thursday evening. Bye.